Hey everybody, it's time for another Rahdo Rules run through with Ryan, and today it's all about meeples and monsters. Ryan, let's do this thing.
Thanks, Rahdo. Hi, it's Ryan from Knights Around a Table, and this is an early prototype copy of Meeples and Monsters, a fantasy bag building game. If you want to see how the game gets set up, skip ahead to the end of the video. AEG has asked me to teach you how to play, so let's get into it. You and your friends play guardians of a fantasy land beset by monsters, and you've taken it upon yourselves to help the king vanquish these evil forces. You build up an increasingly powerful army of specialized meeples who you can level up to gain better abilities and fight your way through this stack of monsters while completing private quest objectives. When the third of these randomized Dark Council cards shows up, everyone gets 2 more turns, during which they could potentially take on a final tier of boss monsters. Whoever has amassed the most points by the end of that cardboard carnage wins the game. I called Meeples and Monsters a bag builder, which is like a deck builder, except it replaces the cards with things that you pull from a drawstring bag. And in this case, those things are meeples. And if you're not familiar with the term deck builder, it means that you begin the game with a handful of crummy or weak elements. Here, it's 7 white peasants and 3 corrupted gray meeples. And you spend those meeples taking various actions to get better meeples into your bag, from which you'll randomly draw them in order to use them to get even better meeples into your bag. The better meeples help you complete quests and fight monsters. Let's meet the meeples. We've already seen the white peasants and these corrupted gray villagers. Then there are the yellow mages, the red clerics, the black knights, and the blue warriors. You've also got 3 prestige class meeples that are harder to get: green rangers, purple paladins, and orange shamans. The meeples all have character artwork printed on one side, but I'm going to flip them over to their blank sides so we can see their colors more clearly. These meeples are called units, but these gray corrupted meeples are not called units. The corrupted meeples essentially represent villagers who are sympathetic to the evil powers in the game, and they refuse to help you in the fight. So whenever the game uses the word unit, it's talking about everybody but the grays. But in a few selected situations, the gray corrupted meeples can come in handy. Off the top of the game, you'll draw 4 meeples from your bag and put them here in your tavern. Whichever player draws the most corrupted meeples gets the start player's sword and gets to go first. If there's a tie for the player who drew the most corrupted meeples, break the tie however you see fit. This is the realm of Rowan, which is split into 4 quarters: the villages, the university, the castle, and the cathedral. At any given time, there are 6 monsters besieging the place. You get to fight them for points and perks. These are action spaces that help you grow your collection of meeples. You can build new action spaces on these empty lots. And if you have the 4 Towers mini expansion, the tower rooms go in these 4 spots. Your turn. Your turn is split up into 3 phases: development, main phase, and draw. In the development phase, you can place meeples on these brown capital spaces. This one, or this one, and or this one. This one is all about upgrading your meeples, but since you don't have any fancy meeples yet, we'll loop back to that. If you put 2 white peasant meeples here, you get to build something. If you put 1 white peasant meeple here, the space accrues a 2nd white peasant meeple from the supply, and you get to build something. There's a row of 4 available buildings next to the board. Choose a building and then place it on one of the empty lots to build it. You get the perk that's on the spot. So a red cleric here or here, a yellow mage here or here, a white peasant and a blue warrior here, or more quest cards here, here, and here. We'll take a look at quests in a sec. You can only activate each capital space once per turn, and these 2 spaces are exclusive. You can choose one or the other. Of course, you can also skip the development phase altogether and move on to the main phase. But at the end of the development phase, you scoop up the meeples you left on the board and put them in your lodgings because they are sleepy. So that means if you placed here, you've gained a white peasant meeple that will wind up in your bag shortly. Main phase. The main phase has you placing meeples from your tavern on the various spaces on the board or fighting monsters. The 4 central spaces are always available, Place a meeple of any color except gray on the university, and it will accrue a yellow mage that you'll scoop up at the end of this phase. In the cathedral, you place 2 meeples of any color except gray. You have to return one of those meeples to the supply, and the space accrues a red cleric for you. Down here, it's 2 of any non-gray meeple and 1 white meeple. You lose one of these 2, it's your choice, and the space accrues a blue warrior. And here, placing a peasant and a warrior nets you a black knight. You leave any meeples you placed on the board until the end of the main phase. There is a catch though. If any of the quadrants where you placed your meeples have 2 or more monsters, those quadrants are overrun. The peasants flee to you for protection. So if the quadrant has 2 monsters, you need to add a peasant from the supply to that space, and you'll be scooping it up and adding it to your bag at the end of your turn. And if the quadrant has 3 monsters on it, you need to add 2 more peasants from the supply to be able to activate the space. You might not want to have all those weakling peasants clogging up your bag, so think carefully about activating spaces in overrun quadrants. Fighting monsters. You can also place your meeples on the monster cards to fight them. The monster's strength is here. This crest shows which of the 4 quadrants the monster will attack when you pull it from the deck. This is the monster's type: humanoid, monstrous, or undead. And these dots indicate the monster's level. This is the number of points it's worth when you defeat it. So, the Troll Shaman is a level 2 humanoid monster with a strength of 5 that attacks the villages, and he's worth 1 point. He also gives you a certain power when you defeat him, which we'll talk about shortly. You place your meeples on a monster in order to fight it. Your meeples have to have a combined strength equal to or greater than the monster's strength. So, in other words, you can't fight a monster unless you can defeat it. Each meeple has a strength value in this red starburst. So, to defeat the tree beast, you need a strength of 5. Each of your knights has a strength of 2, and your peasant has a strength of 1, so 2 knights and a peasant will be enough to chop down the tree beast. If you're trying to satisfy a certain quest, you're allowed to overkill a monster with more than the minimum meeples. I mentioned that you have to add peasants from the supply to a location in a quadrant that's overrun with monsters if you want to activate that space. But here's an exception. If, in the main phase, you place meeples on a monster to defeat it, the peasants won't panic and flock to you for security. So, for example, if the cathedral was overrun with 3 monsters, but you have some meeples taking care of one of them, you wouldn't have to add any peasants from the supply when you activate a location in this quadrant. At the end of the main phase, you scoop up the meeples you placed and any new meeples you've recruited and place them in your lodgings, where they have a nice little nappy nap. If you defeated any monsters, you place those monster cards in your player area, sometimes gaining new abilities, new perks, or extra meeples. Then slide everyone left over in your tavern to your lodgings. Especially near the beginning of the game, this includes those useless corrupted meeples. Hey, no, you jerks get to sleep on the floor. You don't have to use all your units, but you also don't get to hold back any meeples for your next turn. So, use them or lose them. Draw phase. In the draw phase, at the end of your turn, you have to slide all the monster cards so they occupy the lowest numbered slots around the edge of the board. Then you draw the number of monsters you defeated and place them on the board according to the crest at the top right of the card, so that you always have 6 monsters on the board. If you draw a monster card and its quadrant is already filled up, you get to choose which of the other quadrants gets the monster, potentially screwing over your opponents by strategically overrunning a quadrant they wanted to use. So there's a bit of an area control mechanic going on here, except it's not being played by the players. It's shifting as players defeat monsters, making different quadrants more or less desirable for everyone to use. Next, you draw 4 new meeples from your bag and place them in your tavern. If there aren't enough meeples in your bag to draw 4, you throw all the sleepyheads from your lodgings into the bag. That ought to wake them up. And draw the missing meeples until you get to 4. If you constructed a new building this turn, you refill the row to 4 buildings. Buildings. The default spaces on the board are fine, but it's this stack of building tiles that gives every game of Meeples and Monsters a unique feel. As long as there are open spots on the board, you can use one of these spaces to construct a new building during the development phase at the beginning of your turn. Each building adds a new activation space to the quadrant where it's constructed. As with the default spaces, you place the meeples on the left of the arrow to get the perk on the right. Many of these buildings buff your meeps. So, by placing a peasant and a knight on this space, every meeple gets a strength boost of 2 for this turn. This tile buffs all your clerics for this turn. This one buffs a meeple color of your choice 1 point for every corrupted meeple sleeping in your lodgings. The action spaces with a crown on them are King of the Hill spaces. You place one of the meeples listed here and lay down a token in your player color. If play goes all the way around the table and it reaches you and your token is still there, you get a prize depending on which meeple you placed on the spot. But an opponent can knock you out of this space. These 3 tiles introduce the special prestige units to the game: Rangers, Paladins, and Shamans. If any of them get built, you put 3 prestige units of that color on the tile. Well, that's it for the whole game. Once they're gone, they're gone. But because you get so used to scooping up all of the meeples on the board at the end of your turn, I got into the habit of accidentally grabbing all 3 shamans at the end of my turn. To prevent this, I recommend putting the prestige units under the tile so you don't inadvertently cheat. What's so special about the prestige units? Let me show you. Prestige units. The first time you gain one of these prestige units, put its card next to your board. The Shaman and Paladin have a base attack of 2, and the Ranger gets a base attack of 3. Whenever you defeat a monster with a Ranger, you get an extra victory point for doing it. A Paladin gains attack points for every level of the monster it's fighting. So if a Paladin, with its base strength of 2, fights this level 1 termite, that's 2 plus 1 for a strength of 3. If a Paladin fights this level 2 zombie, that's 2 plus 2 for a strength of 4. The shape-shifting shaman acts as a wild meeple and itself simultaneously. So you could, for example, place a peasant and a shaman in the castle, where the shaman would pose as that blue warrior, allowing you to activate the space to get a black knight. Even though the prestige units are levels 1, 2, and 3 respectively, you can't level them up. But the basic units are a different story. Leveling up. Remember this space that you can activate during the development phase at the beginning of your turn? Well, you can place one of your basic units here to level up that class of meeple for the rest of the game. All of your basic units start at level 1. You have to spend your victory points to level them up further. So to level up your cleric class to level 2 costs 0 points. But going from level 2 to level 3 costs you 3 victory points. When you level up a meeple type, you either put a level 2 card on its space, or flip a level 2 card to the level 3 side. At the end of the development phase, the meeple you placed to level up has to go to bed. But now, all meeples you own of that color are leveled up for the rest of the game. What's more, leveled up meeples give you extra abilities. When you unlock level 2 mages, if you have at least 1 mage left in your tavern, you can move it to your lodgings to draw an extra quest card. Level 3 mages do the same thing, except you get to draw 2 quest cards and discard 1. If you upgrade your clerics to level 2, then when your turn starts, if you have at least 1 cleric and at least 1 corrupted meeple in your tavern, you get to draw another meeple from your bag. Level 3 clerics let you draw 2 extra meeples if you meet those same conditions. Level 2 and 3 knights let you draw another meeple if you have 1 or more knights in your tavern. And yes, that ability stacks with the cleric's ability. So the knight could allow you to draw an extra meeple who's corrupted, which satisfies your level 3 cleric's ability, which lets you draw 2 extra meeples. But you can only use these abilities once per turn, so you couldn't use the knight's extra draw ability a second time. Leveling up your warriors to level 2 gets them an extra strength point, and level 3 warriors get to wake up a sleeping peasant from your lodgings to come fight a monster with them. It only works with the first warrior who fights though. As I mentioned, even though the prestige meeples have levels, you can't level them up. Those levels come into play when you're fighting boss monsters or completing quests. Quests. You begin the game with 2 secret quest cards. The lower left corner of a quest card shows you how many points you get for completing it, or how many points you'll lose at the end of the game for not completing it. As soon as you complete a quest with a lightning bolt on it, you get some sort of immediate benefit. Completing an ongoing quest with a sand timer on it gives you a benefit that lasts for the rest of the game. And the quests with a flag on them get you points if you satisfy their conditions by the end of the game. You'll find this symbol on various activation spaces and cards. It means you draw 2 new quests and then discard one. And the one you discard can be one that you already had in your hand. It doesn't have to be one of the ones you just drew. The quests have similar bonuses as the monster cards. Sometimes they power up a Meeple type for the rest of the game. Slide those under the relevant Meeples slot on your player board. This type of bonus means that for the rest of the game, whenever you fight a monster with a knight, any peasants that join in that fight get a 1-point strength buff. Endgame. When you replenish the main board back up to 6 monsters, you'll eventually draw a Dark Council card. The first time that happens, everyone gets 1 more corruption meeple into their bags. The active player gets to draw 5 new meeples during the draw phase, and everyone else draws 1 new meeple to bring their draw count up to 5. For the rest of the game, you'll be drawing 5 meeples at the end of your turn. Until the second Dark Council arrives. Once again, everyone gets another gray meeple into their bag, and everyone but the active player draws an extra meeple to bring their count up to 6. 6 is the new number of meeples you draw at the end of your turn for the rest of the game. Until the third Dark Council arrives. You don't add any corrupted meeples to your bag, and you don't increase your draw count, because when that third Dark Council arrives, that triggers the end of the game. So you play out the round until you get to the starting player, that's the one with the cardboard sword, and then everyone gets 2 more turns before the game ends. What's special about those last 2 turns is that you now have the option of fighting these super-powered level 4 boss monsters that are really strong, but they can potentially net you a ton of points. You can only fight each of these guys once. Put a marker in your player color on the Dark Overlord so that you don't actually fight the same one again in your final turn. You can fight the henchmen in both of your last 2 turns if you want to. Each of these Dark Overlords gets you 6 points when defeated, along with a bonus point if you meet this condition, and even more bonus points if you meet this randomly drawn condition below the card. The Dark Overlords can be defeated by multiple players, but each player can only defeat each Dark Overlord once. And since they're never truly defeated, the Dark Overlords don't have any effect on endgame quests that talk about defeating certain monster types. Those Dark Overlord cards are worth so many points that I think it's worth treating them like an endgame goal, and you plan to fight them from the very beginning of the game using the optimal group of meeples. Provided that the draw works out in your favor. Once everyone has taken their last 2 turns, you count up the points to see who's won. Scoring. At the end of the game, deduct any points for the quests in your hand that you didn't complete, and add any points for the endgame quests that you accomplished. Count up any points from the tower tiles you collected if you're playing with the 4 Towers mini expansion. The player with the most victory points wins, and in the case of a tie, the player with the fewest white peasant meeples wins. And if there's still a tie, then all tied players share in the victory. The 4 Towers. The 4 Towers mini expansion adds extra locations to each quadrant. If you assign the correct meeples to a tower tile, you claim it during your cleanup step and flip over the next tile in the stack. Most of the requirements of the tower tiles are similar to the way that the buildings work, but the tower tiles often involve corrupted meeples, like this one where you assign a warrior and any number of corrupted meeples in your tavern. You lose the warrior, but you get a VP for each corrupted meeple you assign. Plus, you get to draw 2 quest cards and discard 1. Some of the tower tiles have multiple scores on them. You can collect sets of these tiles, and the points go up for each tile in the set that you own. So these 2 tiles are worth 2 points individually, or 5 points total if you collect both. Setup. To set up the game, sort the meeples by color. Everyone takes a player board and puts 7 peasants and 3 corrupted meeples into their bag. Everyone gets 2 random quest cards to start. Put Put the boss monsters on the scoreboard and deal out 3 random bonus conditions beneath the Dark Overlords. Put a scoring token for each player on the board. Shuffle the buildings and place them next to the main board. Turn up 4 of them. If you're playing with the 4 Towers mini expansion, shuffle the tower tiles and put a stack of 5 in each quadrant. Then turn up the top tile in each stack. Split the monster deck into level 1, level 2, and level 3 monsters. Shuffle a Dark Council card into the bottom 4 cards of the level 1 monsters, the bottom 8 cards of the level 2 monsters, and the bottom half of the level 3 monsters. Stack the deck so it goes level 1, level 2, and level 3. Deal 6 monsters out to the board. Everyone draws 4 meeples, and the player who drew the most corrupted meeples gets the first player's sword. And now, Rahdo, you ready to play Meeples and Monsters?
Thanks, Ryan. I think we've got it. And if you folks would like to learn a little bit more about this game, you can follow the links that are on the screen right now or down in the show notes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.